My study is titled Implications of Climate Change on Moose Density in Vermont Populations. So, some studies done by the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Service have found that moose populations in Vermont have steadily been decreasing. This is likely a result of climate change giving rise to warmer falls and earlier springs. These conditions are great for ticks to survive longer into the season. Ticks are a really bad pest for moose because they drain their blood and end up killing them. We really want to conserve moose species because they bring in a lot of important revenue to the state. They generate a lot of money from people putting entries into the moose permit lottery, as well as gear sales related to moose hunting. And we can use that money from the state to go towards conserving these animals. We also care about conserving them because they're just a large, charismatic species that we would like to see stick around for future generations. So this brings us to our main research question, which is how does climate change affect the density of moose populations in Vermont? So I wanted to see how citizen science data from iNaturalist would reflect these moose population estimates. I hypothesized that consistent with warmer temperatures, we're going to see moose observations that are declining from the early 2010s to now. So my methods were to collect moose observations in Vermont from 2010 to 2020 using the United States map that can be found on iNaturalist.org. I divided Vermont by its 14 counties, assigned each a number from 1 to 14 going in alphabetical order, and then used a random number generator to select 4 counties at random. Then I compared the average temperature from each date that there was an observation to see what the correlation would be between temperature and observations. So my results showed that the 4 random chosen counties are Addison, Chittenden, Franklin, and Rutland. So Addison ended up having a significantly higher amount of observations than the other 3 counties. Figure 1 shows that there was actually a decrease in the average temperature on dates that moose were being observed. Figure 2 shows that the density of moose observations is much higher from 2018 to 2020 compared to earlier in the decade. Now, both of these figures are not consistent with what I hypothesized. In Figure 1, we would have expected to see an increase in the temperature over time when the moose were observed. We're likely seeing a decrease because the data used in the graph is only plotting observations on dates moose were observed rather than a comprehensive timeline on temperatures of every day between 2010 and 2020. Similarly, in Figure 2, it's not what we would have expected. We would have thought to see that the majority of observations would be in the early 2010s. However, the majority of observations later in the decade is likely because iNaturalist has increased in popularity in recent years, resulting in a graph that is biased towards more recent observations. The study did not account for that observer effort, therefore we have a biased graph. So this brings us to the limitations. This iNaturalist data is too recent to show a complete climate change timeline. It only shows the span of 10 years, which is not enough time to see how climate is really affecting moose density. The observations also don't account for the true population density, just what was observed and what was uploaded onto the website. And because only a few counties were selected, we really don't know what is going on there. It could be different depending on the counties that were chosen. For example, if more counties in the Northeast Kingdom were chosen, we would completely see a different graph because there are way more moose in those counties because of how rural it is. So the main takeaway is that this data were not rich enough to give a definitive answer on how climate affects moose populations. However, with more time and better and more complete resources, we really could reach a much more comprehensive conclusion that is more in line with what Vermont Fish and Wildlife and other independent researchers have found. Thank you.